Warning: these social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here. Another edition of In Case You Missed It news on this now 27th day of December. Hopefully you guys had a very Merry Christmas. Enjoyed the day, the family, the friends. Load up on food, tons of calories, all that good stuff. Hopefully you got exactly what you wanted here over the holidays. And lots to cover here on the broadcast here this morning. I'm actually going to kind of break this in two, talk a little bit about some financials, then come back and talk about Devolution Part 15 that just dropped yesterday evening. It's been something that's kind of been plaguing me a little bit by way of what's been going on with coronavirus, COVID, the vaccines, Trump, all that good stuff. So that's exactly what that's going to hit, and we're going to cover it here on the latter part of the broadcast here this morning. But first, obviously, financials. We're going to talk a little bit about the Turkish lira, what's going on there, rolling blackouts, energy issues across Europe, as always, housing market, Alexa's fired, number of things here. RV sales are going through the roof still. So all that being said, stick around. I'll be right back. Spectre here. Just wanted to give a big thank you to all you guys who continue to support my work. Jump in, day out on the streams, support all the various pieces I put out, etc., etc. And in doing so, I figured what the heck, we'll put some merch out there if you guys wish to continue to support and help defray some of the costs of streaming, which many of you guys know many of us incur. Got a handful of shirts and that here. Spectre Does News. We got the Realize, Real Lies shirt and that you hear on my PSA periodically. And of course the No BS insignia from the show I do over on the 5x5 channel, all of which you can get for the low price of $19.99. Aside from that, you can get the Let's Go Brandon hashtag FJB shirt as well in a variety of colors. And I've recently added the hoodies in a variety of colors you can get right there as well. And last but not least, you can grab yourself a No BS shirt and the Zip Up hoodie as well. If you don't want any articles of clothing, well, you can grab yourself a mug or a 20-ounce water tumbler if you wish. Your choice. And of course, as always, just want to thank you, the listeners, the audience, those who are in chat day in, day out. Thank you for your continued support. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Jumping right into it here this morning. Take a look at the old weather. Looks like we got a couple systems now cruising across the west. California looks like they may finally be getting some rain in what had been drought stricken. So hopefully you guys are getting perhaps a little reprieve out that way. And of course, up in the northeast, we got some showers and activity pushing across the northeast through, looks to be Pennsylvania, New York, all up in that area. Some of the junk net that we had through our area just last evening. Precipitation wise, well, what are we getting? Are we getting rain or snow? Looks like out west you're getting more snow than rain, especially up around Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Oregon, etc., etc. Around the upper parts of the country, Minnesota, upper peninsula, Wisconsin, Michigan, you guys looks like you're getting some snow. And then pushing out over to Ohio and Pennsylvania, looks like perhaps maybe you guys might be getting a little snow as well. As far as everybody else, yeah, looks like we're in the clear. I got this nice bubble of warm air in that cruising across here, so not going to complain here today. Volume is very low. How low is low? Let's see here. See if maybe I need to turn the gain up. I'm playing with a new setup here this morning, so you guys are perhaps a little bit of a guinea pig this morning. I did some recordings and that, testing a bunch of stuff yesterday after trying to get this thing set up, but let's see here. See if that's any better right there. Turn the old gain up on this sucker. So bear with me, folks. All right, let's see if that's any better. You guys will give feedback, I'm sure. That being said, U.S. futures hit all-time high as Santa rally spreads and markets cheer. Says the Santa Claus rally is here and stocks are set to make their 69th all-time high for 2021 when they open in 90 minutes. U.S. index futures rose to fresh all-time highs despite mid-thin holiday muted trading and a mood of caution as traders evaluated spiking coronavirus cases as investors monitored progress on the Biden admin's economic stimulus and social spending plan. After President-in-waiting Kamala Harris said neither he nor Joe Biden are giving up on the bill. Futures on the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 futures both climbed 0.3% at 7:45 a.m. in New York, the former trading at all-time highs of 47.33. The dollar strengthened, 10-year U.S. Treasury yields were little changed, and while crude, oil, and gold dipped, a dollar gauge ticked up. In overnight news, Kamala Harris said the Biden admin is seeking a path forward for its Build Back Better economic stimulus. Elsewhere, the U.S. holiday sales jumped 8.5% from last year as consumers spent more money on clothes, jewelry, and electronics, a report from MasterCard's Spending Pulse showed. Still in U.S. pre-market trading, U.S. travel stocks retreated, led by United Airlines Holdings. Gee, I wonder why. We'll talk about that here momentarily. After hundreds of flights were canceled over Christmas due to a spike in COVID cases. Here are some of the more notable pre-market movers. United Airlines Holding is down 2.9%, as is Delta down 2%, and American Airlines also down 2.1%. Velo 3D rose in after-hours trading Thursday after announcing delivery of its first Sapphire XC to an aerospace customer. Surgalign Holdings dropped in post-market after filing for the potential sale of equity and debt securities. Says in the latest COVID developments, Anthony Fauci, one of the top U.S. medical advisors, said Americans should stay vigilant because the Omicron cases can still overwhelm hospitals, even if evidence suggests the strain symptoms may be less severe. And aside from that, the market snapshot this morning, S&P 500 futures are up 0.2% to 4724.50. Stocks Europe 600 up 0.3%. Euro little change at 1.1310. The Nikkei is down 0.4%, 28,676 and change. Shanghai Composite little changed at 3615.97. Brent futures little change at 76.06 a barrel. Gold spot down 0.3% to 1805.61 per ounce. And the U.S. dollar index up 0.2% at 96.22. Some other overnight news out of Bloomberg. The Biden admin is seeking a path forward for its Build Back Better economic stimulus and social spending plan, Vice President Kamala Harris said Sunday. Coronavirus infections surged across the globe, with China reporting the highest number of local cases since January, darkening the year-end holiday period. China's central bank pledged greater support for the economy on Saturday and said it will make monetary policy more forward-looking and targeted. As far as the event calendar, pretty skinny on the day here today. 10:30 a.m. U.S. Dallas Fed manufacturing activity for December, estimate of 13, prior was 11.8. Volume still very low. Pardon me here as I make adjustments. Stand by. Alright, let's see if that's any better. Aside from that, Erdogan is secretly pillaging billions in Turkish assets to prop up the lira and his rule. And of course, we've talked quite a bit on the broadcast about the lira tanking and their efforts to try and thwart that. This dating back to Friday the 24th now, says yesterday we discussed how Erdogan's shocking plan to rescue the Turkish lira once it crossed the red line of 18 versus the US dollar came into being, and how it will eventually make an already dismal situation even worse, because it really represents a massive stealth rate hike, one of which will put huge stress on Turkey's balance sheet and will make the government budget more vulnerable to future currency shocks. There's been an epic interest rate hike without calling it one, according to Refet Gerkanayak, a professor of economics at Bilkent University in Ankara, says there will be a big burden on the budget when there is a sharp increase in the foreign exchange rate. This kind of burden usually gets monetized, which means even higher foreign exchange and inflation rates. For those who missed, our explainers of Erdogan's cunning plan to stabilize the Turkish lira until the elections, here it is again in a nutshell. The Treasury will underwrite losses in the new lira deposits in the case of another run on the currency. That puts a strain on one of the few remaining bright spots in Turkey's economy, its fiscal position, and highlights a growing trend among policymakers to lean on the public budget to pay for the cost of misguided policies. And he says, we can say at the budget, the last remaining anchor has been sacrificed to claim that a rate hike has been avoided. According to Ibrahim Turhan, a former deputy governor of the Turkish Central Bank, who is now an opposition politician. In this way, the cost of the lira's depreciation has been put on the society as a whole. Sound familiar? It's what central banksters typically do. So the bad news that Erdogan has taken an already hopeless situation and made it worse. The good news is that he has managed to kick the can for at least a few weeks, perhaps months, until the big macro funds realize just how much more precarious Turkey's financial condition has become, because for all the posturing, the fundamental driver behind Turkey's woeful financial condition, Erdogan's demands to keep rates lower despite soaring inflation, is not going away until Erdogan himself is gone. Meanwhile, one thing may have been ignored, and it is that the actual cost now of Erdogan's panicked intervention. According to preliminary calculations, the bottom line to keep Turkey's currency from a terminal collapse this week is anywhere between 6 and 13.5 billion. So bottom line, Turkey's situation is not in very good shape. I think that at the end of the day, Erdogan has probably pillaged things, and until the people wake up, kind of like here stateside, and realize that the Federal Reserve is not our friend, it's neither federal nor a reserve, and it is the Federal Reserve here in the United States that is the cause of the money printing and inflation and that we see, till the Turks wake up and actually see that for themselves and throw out Erdogan, things probably will not change. So aside from that, rolling blackouts spread across Europe amid the energy crisis, as Europe's energy crisis worsened this week when Kosovo introduced rolling blackouts to most of its 2 million citizens, according to Bloomberg. This is on Thursday, the Kosovo Energy Distribution Services announced rolling 2-hour power blackouts for 2 million people due to an overload of its electrical grid. Gee, who'd have thought we'd be seeing this in this day and age across Europe, especially now? Says KEDS asked customers to reduce power given insufficient internal generation to cover consumption and the global energy crisis. The Balkan country, Europe's poorest nation, experienced a technical issue at its largest coal-fired power plant that had to shut down last month, which forced the government to import electricity at high prices. And for those who might be a little bit map challenged, well, here we are right down here, Kosovo, kind of sandwiched in between Serbia and North Macedonia, kind of down in that area. Some of the Balkanized states in that after the breakup of the USSR. Simultaneously, Serbia was forced to cut electricity to customers. Britain's network operator issued a power supply warning, and France's nuclear plant outage all culminated into a perfect storm of straining the continent's grid, resulting in reduced power supplies and exorbitantly high prices. And there we see, per Javier Blas, no surprises in the announcement today by Kosovo of rolling 2-hour blackouts for most consumers. It's very clear 3 months ago that the real crisis was in Eastern Europe, and particularly in the Balkans. The EU was sleeping or didn't care. I would venture to say it was probably the latter. So last week, Kosovo's economy minister Arlene Rizvanoli said the shuttering of the nation's main coal-fired power plant had worsened the energy crisis. He said power imports were, quote, extremely costly. Grid data from ENTSO-E shows electricity imports from Albania, Serbia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia plunged from 750 megawatts on Wednesday to about 469 megawatts on Thursday. Jeremy Weir, CEO of commodities trader Trafigura Group, warned that the more European countries could face rolling blackouts in the event of a severe winter. 11 European associations, from steels to fertilizers to cement to paper mills, published a memo Thursday indicating energy-intensive companies are paying, quote, unbearably high energy prices, end quote, that may force them to shutter operations. However, there is good news for the continent as benchmark Dutch front-month gas plunged as much as 43% from a peak of 180 euros per megawatt hour to around 102 euros in the last several days, as a flotilla of U.S. liquefied natural gas tankers is headed to the fuel-starved continent. And of course, here we see the ticker for the natural gas futures. Looks like they've had perhaps a little bit of a reprieve. And no word yet on whether or not the flotilla has indeed made it and offloaded as of yet. But nonetheless, there's more good news that the weather forecast for Germany will turn milder, and this will help keep a lid on gas prices. Europe remains caught in its worst energy crisis ever, as some relief is on the way, but the worst may not be over, as the Northern Hemisphere winter has just begun. So, nonetheless, we'll have to keep an eye on the situation as we have on the broadcast here for the last several months. Aside from that, looking at some housing here, the 2021 housing market in charts says it's been an absolutely gangbusters year for housing, which, as we noted earlier today, just saw both median and average prices hit fresh all-time highs for new homes. In fact, as the chart below shows, new home prices are currently rising more than twice as fast as they did during the last housing bubble. How many of you guys out there have either bought or sold a home here this year, or even thought about trying to jump from perhaps a blue state to red state, only to find that whatever area you're looking at is way out of your reach now? Any of you guys out there in that demographic? Anyway, it says total new home sales in the 100,000s versus median new home sale prices. In green here, we've got the median new home prices. Currently, we're north of about 400,000 now that's the median price. And new home sales in red down here, it looks like, I guess we're probably north of 600,000, I guess, reading to the left side of the chart there. Says it's just as crazy when it comes to existing homes, where the NAR continues to lament the lack of new supply, as more and more millennials are hoping to stop blowing their money on rent and actually purchase a house. Yet with existing home prices also at near record levels, housing has become extremely unaffordable to most. Yeah, kind of hard to buy a house when all you're getting is stimulus checks and that from the government, I suppose, right? But and throw on top of that, commodity prices have been through the roof, which we've tracked throughout the year, from lumber to PVC to copper, you name it, everything to build a house. Well, guess what? You're going to pay more for a new build, period. It says, and while increasingly more middle-class Americans remains shut out of buying a new home, housing, which has traditionally been the one asset class that represents the bulk of middle-class America's net worth, continues to appreciate, which is good news for those lucky to be part of the U.S. homeownership class. With that in mind, here's a look at some of the key numbers of housing and mortgages in 2021, courtesy of Goldman Sachs, and a look ahead to 2022. 2021 was characterized by record high rates of house price appreciation and record agency mortgage-backed security issuance volumes. It was up 45 basis points, 20% higher in the Case-Shiller U.S. House Price Index, down 1%. Single-family housing starts decreased by 1%. 33% of outstanding conventional 30-year mortgage borrowers have a 50 basis point or larger refinance incentive as of the fourth quarter of 2021. 3.4 trillion, that's the number for agency mortgage-backed security issuance year to date, up from 3 trillion year to date in 2020. and $470 billion, that's the Federal Reserve Agency's mortgage-backed security holdings, increased by $470 billion over the past year. There we go, spit it out. And of course, all that, mind you, folks, we've talked ad nauseum about that. The Fed's $120 billion a month, $80 billion in treasuries, and $40 billion in mortgage-backed securities. That's how they get to that number. They're buying up your debt on your house, period. This is looking at 2022. Goldman expects the housing market to moderate but remain strong, and mortgage-backed security issuance volumes to slow but still remain substantial in 2022. Goldman Sachs expects mortgage rates to increase a further 50 basis points in 2022, ending at 3.6%. They expect Case-Shiller U.S. House Price Index to grow by 10%. Single-family housing starts to increase by 4% over this year. Supply chain challenges are going to be relevant. So that means lumber, PVC, and copper, and all the things necessary to build a house probably will not abate for the foreseeable future. Expect 20% of outstanding conventional 30-year mortgage borrowers to have at least a 50 basis point incentive to refinance. So if by chance you're locked in at a rate of, say, 3.5%, and the rate right now is 2.75%, well, chances are you would probably spend the money to go ahead and do that. Look for agency mortgage-backed security issuance to reach $2.5 trillion gross and $725 billion net in 2022. The Federal Reserve's mortgage-backed security holdings to decrease by $40 billion in 2022. And of course, they're tapering that, as we have learned from the FOMC here just a few short weeks ago. And some key trends: U.S. housing affordability has declined as house prices have moved up, both in absolute terms and when compared to rents, which incidentally are also at all-time highs. Of course, everything is on the move upward, but yeah, chances are it's probably not going to be all that affordable. Housing versus rental affordability indices, the higher the number on this side, the less affordable it becomes. That's the rent to income ratio in blue cruising through there. And of course, the mortgage payment income ratio down here is trending upward. It says 98% of zip codes had positive house price growth over the past year. I would love to find out what the last 2% of zip codes were that didn't, frankly. There's your zip code price diffusion index going up. And let's see, home building activity remains constrained. Let's see, we got some other interesting graphs here. Housing starts, housing market index and housing starts. So all that good stuff. Housing supply remains tight as well. And on it goes. I think we get the idea. Bottom line, if you're in a position to move and want to do so, get from a blue state to red state, now is probably the time to do that, especially while interest rates are favorable. If you're locked into where you're at and need to refinance your mortgage, now is probably the time to do that as well, because it's not going to last. As we know with the Federal Reserve, they're tapering, and we've talked quite a bit on the broadcast that the old banksters are anticipating at least 2 to 3 rate hikes throughout 2022. Aside from that, Alexa, you're fired. A quarter of users abandoned spying devices within 2 weeks. Any of you guys have one of these spy devices in your house? Hopefully you guys don't. But apparently, those who have gotten the Amazon Alexa device likely noticed that the smart speaker has tried to upsell them while asking about the weather in the last few months. Of course, this is because Amazon understands there is fading interest in its money-losing Alexa voice-controlled smart speaker division. Money-losing, huh? Who'd have thunk? According to internal data obtained by Bloomberg, 15 to 25% of new Alexa users during 2018 through 2021 completely abandoned the device in the second week of ownership. Oh, there's a nice investment. I have no idea how much it even costs to buy one of those stinking things, but hey Alexa, I just want to know the weather, and then all of a sudden after 2 weeks you kick it to the curb. Not a very good investment, I suppose, but hey, I digress. Amazon concluded that the market for smart speakers had passed its growth phase last year and would only grow 1.2% annually moving forward. The company lost $5 on average per Alexa device sold, and by 2028 expects to have that number. Generating revenue through the Alexa device has been challenging, hence why Alexa now has features that tell you what to wear when asking about the weather and even suggest buying those clothes on Amazon. How nice. Says these statistics don't paint an excellent outlook for Amazon's money-losing Alexa division that employs more than 10,000 people with fixed costs of around $4.2 billion in 2021. Even though Amazon is focused on new ways to regain user retention, maybe people are just tired of Alexa's smart devices spying on them. Hey, there's a thought. Says there have been countless complaints, 75,000 and counting, of Amazon users fed up with the company's surveillance capitalism tactics to harvest their data with the core purpose of profit making. This has spawned into at least 3 class action suits alleging that Amazon devices recorded people without permission. Says the always-on microphone has sparked controversy with privacy advocates, and their calls to drop the devices have grown louder. Perhaps people are figuring out that they have a corporation monitoring their conversations is perhaps a bit too intrusive, and why user retention is sinking. Gee, who'd have thunk? People probably are actually wising up, and hey, what else has happened throughout this scamdemic? A lot of people sitting at home watching their kids. Chances are they may have bought a new PC or some other digital device as their kids are home from the schools, and perhaps maybe people done a little bit of research and found out what's really going on behind the scenes with all this surveillance tech. Doesn't matter if we're talking Amazon, Google, Facebook, and the like. And they say, well, you know what, Alexa? We're just going to unplug you and put you right back in the box. So aside from that, we've talked quite a bit about RVs and that here on the broadcast, and apparently that still remains incredibly strong. Demand is leading to another month of blowout shipments. Says it was one thing when Americans hoarded food and toilet paper during the early days of the virus scamdemic. Then, guns and ammo after social unrest broke out, but 20 months later, recreational vehicles continue to be hoarded at levels never seen before. I didn't even know that was possible to hoard an RV, but I suppose if you got some money burning a hole in your pocket, then why not, I suppose. A new RV Industry Association report released Tuesday shows shipments for towable RVs jumped 14% in November to 43,881 from 38,485 the same month last year. All motorhome shipments soared 30.4% to 5,254 vehicles for the month, and total RV shipments increased 15.6%. Holy moly. Or perhaps, as alluded to with the housing market, if you're priced out of a new house, maybe people are deciding, you know what, we'll see the good old USA from park to park in an RV or tow behind. I don't know. So like all of 2021, November's sales are a record for that month. It says for the first 11 months of the year, towable RV shipments totaled a mind-boggling 506,952 versus 353,109 a year earlier. Motorhome shipments increased to 52,791 from 36,921, and total RV shipments erupted 44% to 559,743 vehicles. The pandemic has transformed the way Americans vacation. Instead of fancy resorts and hotels in the big metropolises, people opt for self-contained motorhomes parked in rural areas or natural parks. I guess I'll ask you guys, for those that are out traveling across the country, how many RV parks and that do you see that are completely full? That's a good question. Demand for RVs remain incredibly strong, driving RV manufacturers and suppliers to continue to build a record number of RVs month after month for the past 13 months, said RV Industry Association Chief Executive Craig Kirby. Interest in RVing remains high, even in what has traditionally been the off-season, Kirby said. In a separate report, RVIA forecasted RV wholesale shipments would exceed 600,000 units in 21 and 2022. RV manufacturers and suppliers have accomplished something never before seen with the incredible number of RV produced in 2021 and forecasted to be built in 2022, Kirby said in early December. Americans are rediscovering the great outdoors, and the RV boom may continue well into 2022 and beyond as millennial ownership steadily increases. And I guess it probably won't be very long before we'll probably get some crazy articles. I'll speculate here a little bit that the secondary market for RVs, maybe we'll find out, is going through the roof as well because, well, if they have to build new RVs and things of that nature, especially the powered versions, Class A, B, C, whatever, if they're impacted by chips like everybody else, what do you think is going to happen to the secondary used market? So stay tuned. I'm speculating here perhaps what we may see, just like what we have seen with the automotive industry as a whole. Aside from that, 2,400 flights were canceled since Christmas Eve on crew shortage. Gee, haven't we seen this playbook before? Oh, like about a month ago. Hopefully none of you guys were impacted on the show here this morning. If you're in the audience, whether you've had kids coming in, traveling, trying to get from point A to B across the country, what have you, hopefully we're not on a United or Delta flight. Says as the holiday weekend draws to a close, it has been anything but merry for tens of thousands of stranded airline passengers who had their flight canceled due to a flare-up of the Omicron variant that resulted in staffing shortages of pilots and crew for several major airline carriers. Data tracker FlightAware.com shows U.S. flight cancellations exceeded 2,400 in just the past 48 hours. Mind you, this article came through yesterday afternoon. Says the situation has yet to ease on Sunday as total cancellations within, into, or out of the U.S. topped 754 flights as of 1 p.m. yesterday. On Christmas Day, U.S. cancellations topped nearly 1,000. Henry Hartevelt, president of travel consulting firm Atmosphere Research Group, told Bloomberg that air travel disruptions might extend into the next week. Flight cancellations are a concern at a time when people are traveling to spend time with family and friends for the holidays, Hartevelt said. No airline wants to be viewed as the Grinch who stole Christmas. Yeah, probably a little late on that one. Says, in our reporting of the travel chaos that began on Christmas Eve and continued through the weekend, read here and here, we noted Delta Airlines and United Airlines Holdings were the carriers most affected by labor shortages. Both airlines acknowledged cancellations were due to an outbreak of the Omicron variant. Flight cancellations due to staffing shortages have been nothing new for airlines. And perhaps now we know why the RV business is picking up, because the airline industry has turned to crap. Flight cancellations due to staffing shortage have been nothing new. There's the articles net from the past. Says many travelers who had their flights canceled or delayed vented on social media this weekend. And of course, let's hope Hartevelt isn't right that travel disruptions could persist through New Year's Eve, because that would officially make this holiday travel season one of the worst in years. So perhaps the key takeaway out of this is quit traveling through the airports. Quit using United and Delta and all these jokers. They want to have their little masking parties and that on the planes. Go right ahead with the 3 passengers you now have. You lose money in every single flight. And of course, guess what happened, folks? Over the years, we've watched all this consolidation take place. We used to have a ton of competition, but of course, all the big fish ate all the little fish. And so now you're down to United, Delta, and American, and their partners abroad. See how that works? All this nice little consolidation brought to you by the Federal Reserve and easy money and mergers and acquisitions and things of that nature. That's how we got here. Aside from that here this morning, outpacing 2019 levels, all of a sudden there is a rental supply crisis. So, as if you can't get from point A to B this past weekend, well, even if you might have actually made it through, a good possibility you might not have been able to finish your last leg of your trip to your destination because, well, they know how to take the reservation, they just don't know how to hold the reservation. And perhaps anybody who watches Seinfeld might recall the episode about the taking versus holding of reservations, and we'll understand the play here. Says supply chain issues aren't just showing up for consumer staples, they're also starting to rear their heads in rental cars. Says there's been a shortage in the rental car industry since earlier this year, and while travelers are encountering higher rates and fewer choices, according to a new Wall Street Journal article, companies like Hertz are struggling, quote unquote, to restock fleets after downsizing due to COVID. Oh, wait a minute. Was it Hertz or who was that said they were going to be buying a bunch of Teslas here before long? Anyway, says for customers lucky enough to even find a car, many are being forced to downsize or book vehicles they didn't originally intend. Says at the same time, rental rates are skyrocketing. The daily rate is now $81, which is up 31% from a year prior, the Wall Street Journal reported. Hasn't someone told Hertz the official CPI number is only 6.7%? Oh, I guess they don't really care, do they? Says this figure is up from about $46 a day prior to the scamdemic. Says in winter destinations like Maui, Salt Lake City, and Bozeman, Montana, rates are over $100 a day, Wall Street Journal reported. And of course, we got to throw in the Omicron variant here because it's the catch-all now. It caused some travelers to switch from flying to driving, further depleting supply of rental cars. One traveler who chose to drive to North Carolina from Chicago told the Journal it was overall a high-stress situation. Yeah, and of course, if the airlines suck, what do you think people are going to do? Well, apparently they're either taking rental cars or buying RVs, and now we understand. Says the same traveler was limited to just two car choices, a Dodge muscle car and a Chevy Spark subcompact, and paid $725 for a 9-day trip. Let's see, you can have this big old gas-guzzling Dodge Charger over here, or we're going to give you this nugget of a Spark compact, but you're basically going to pay a boatload regardless. How nice. Says, I couldn't think too much about budget or anything like that because if we didn't get it all figured out in a matter of hours, we were going to be out of luck, she said. Another potential traveler, 24-year-old Cassie Clark from New York City, told the Wall Street Journal, I'm not going to see my family for Christmas at all because of the rental car situation. Meanwhile, rental car companies, like everyone else, are citing the semiconductor shortage as a reason for the lack of supply. Avis chief executive Joseph Ferrero recently said that a large part of the company's great prior quarter was due to higher prices. The America's booking patterns for the fourth quarter and holiday season appear robust and are currently outpacing 2019 levels, he said on an earnings call. The supply crunch partially comes as a result of names like Hertz downsizing their fleets after COVID, but rental fleet utilization rates have risen recently. Avis fleet utilization was up 71% from 50% in the first 9 months of the year. And Henry Hartevelt, a travel industry analyst, concluded the car rental situation will only get better if the car manufacturing landscape improves. And until then, it's going to be one of the bleakest times to be renting a car. So, there you have it by way of what is going on in rental cars. And of course, one can probably surmise that as the airlines, airports, and that crap all over you and don't really care whether or not you get from point A to B, well, people are going to try and find alternative means. Aside from that, TikTok wins the internet's most visited site in 2021. I am not on TikTok, by the way. I don't wish to be hooked by their technology, and chances are if I did, I would probably not get a single thing done. TikTok overtook Google as the most popular website in 2021, according to web security company Cloudflare's 2021 year in review for internet traffic. Says the video sharing app owned by Beijing-based ByteDance was everywhere this year. Its secretive algorithm has hooked more than 1 billion monthly users, contributing to its popularity. Last year, the app only ranked number 7 or 8 on Cloudflare's list, quickly climbed the ladder to nab the top spot, according to the company. Says it was on February 17th of this year that TikTok got the top spot for a day, Cloudflare wrote in the report. Now, back in March, TikTok got a few more days and also in May, but it was after August 10th of this year that TikTok took the lead on most days. Says there were some days when Google was number one, but October and November were mostly TikTok days, including on Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Behind TikTok this year, Cloudflare ranked Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, YouTube, Twitter, and WhatsApp in that order. So here we see the most popular domains late in 2021. TikTok at the helm here, WhatsApp down toward the bottom. Most popular domains in late of last year, there we see TikTok was only at number 7. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Netflix, all well above them at that time. And then it says here's TikTok's rank that accelerated to the number 1 spot by late year. And as they noted, this has picked up considerably from January of this year all the way to and through where we are presently. It says TikTok has also displaced Facebook as the most popular social media website. Gee, why do you suppose that is? Is it for the fact that perhaps TikTok maybe, I don't know, it doesn't censor as much? I don't know. But the word of caution in my mind is that, hey, all you TikTokers out there realize you are feeding your data right into the CCP's database. They are collecting all of your data. Not to say that Facebook and all these jokers on here aren't doing it as well, but it's a lesser of two evils. Which one would you rather have your data going through? China or here? Anyway, just a thought. Says TikTok's dominance is changing how social media works and has become a threat to U.S. big tech. Yeah, right. Now, mind you, I think TikTok has obviously been pretty secretive through ByteDance about opening up what their algos are. If you remember right here, probably, what was it, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago when Trump was still in office, there was this look at banning a lot of stuff out of China. Some of these high-tech folks, and of course it looked like perhaps, I want to say, what was it, Microsoft, I think, was trying to partner a deal with ByteDance as they tried to issue an IPO here. And I think all that stuff fell through, and of course now we've seen a complete reversal in that regard. So last but not least, financially on the morning, America's white-collar workers see pay rise at fastest pace in more than 20 years. So all you folks out in chat, I expect that each of you, come the new year, probably are going to have fatter paychecks than that, I suppose, at least according to this article. It says it appears burnt-out junior bankers aren't the only white-collar workers who have seen their compensation improve over the past 12 months. It says according to a report published in Sunday's Wall Street Journal, America's salaried employees are finally seeing wage gains commensurate with those experienced by often lower-paid hourly workers. So are you guys keeping pace with hourly workers? Citing data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, American professionals toward the end of this year saw their compensation jump at the fastest rate in nearly 20 years, though that's still lower than the pace of headline inflation, which is running at a year-over-year rate of nearly 7%, according to the latest available CPI data, which is the fastest pace in nearly 4 decades. For a more detailed breakdown of inflation by category, we can see there. We've covered that, obviously, and of course, here we see graphically where we are at and pointing clear back into the early 80s. 1982 seems to be the year that we typically go to. It says, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, these rapidly increasing price pressures will, in many cases, decimate the gains accrued by advancing wages. The bottom line, if the money printing goes faster than your wages go up, gee, you're fighting a losing battle, aren't you? Says data from Q3 shows American private sector workers saw their pay improve by 4.6% year over year. However, the most serious gains were realized by workers in the hospitality industry like bartenders and waiters. And there we see the quarterly change, service sector here in the lighter blue, management, business, financial, and darker blue. Both appear to be on the rise, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but guess what? If we wouldn't have had all the money printing by the Fed, would we have needed it in the first place? And couple that with the lockdowns and, of course, the fact that with nobody working and people just sitting at home buying, we're not producing anything, so you have more dollars chasing fewer goods. What do you think is going to happen? It says, for those in positions of management, business, and financial occupations, wages rose 3.9% in the quarter, the fastest pace since 2003 for this bucket of workers, although it was still slower than their blue-collar peers. Now, fortunately for them, it looks like private employers are setting aside money for more pay raises next year. A survey from the Conference Board earlier this month found that employers are setting aside an average of 3.9% of total payroll for wage increases next year, and that's the largest amount since 2008. Candidates are turning down our offers or wanting to negotiate more aggressively than they did in the past, said Kathy Patterson, Chief Human Resources Officer at Ally Financial. Said the Detroit-based lender is raising its salary and bonus pools while also increasing its contributions to its employee 401k plans. Part of the reason for the increase is the increasing stress due to chronic understaffing across the economy. Workers apparently expect to be well compensated for the additional stress and work, especially in the financial services industry. Says there's been so much pressure on pay, said Ellen Johnson, managing director of Johnson Associates, a compensation consulting firm focused on financial services. My clients are understaffed. With COVID, they curtailed hiring, and now, with a spike in the economy and markets, they're working people very, very hard, he added. Says while this is good news for workers, even if the gains on average weren't enough to counter the impact of surging inflationary pressures, economists are growing increasingly worried about the prospects of a wage price spiral. Says if this happens when companies raise pay, passing increased costs along to consumers in the form of higher prices, which in turn prompts workers to demand higher wages to offset their loss in buying power. You understand how that cycle works, folks? You get in the infinite do loop. For those that might be coders or programmers might know what that means in the old days, I suppose. Says we expect the Fed will be keeping an eye out for any signs of this dynamic, issuing any warnings in the form of a verbose central bank research report. Well, bottom line, let's kick it all to the curb, get rid of the fiat currency, go back to the gold standard, and I think we would be a lot better off. So anyway, that's what we got financially on the morning here. I think what I am going to do, I'm going to reset up here and get things ready for the back half of the broadcast here this morning. We'll talk a little bit about Devolution Part 15 that just dropped from Patel Patriot last night. Had the opportunity to read through that here, so stick around, I'll be right back. It shall be construed to prohibit the Department of State or the Broadcasting Board of Governors from engaging in any medium or form of communication, either directly or indirectly, because a United States domestic audience is or may be thereby exposed to program material, or based on a presumption of such exposure. Such material may be made available within the United States and disseminated, when appropriate, pursuant to Sections 502 and 1005 of the United States Information and Educational Exchange Act of 1948. 22 U.S.C. 1462 and 1437, except that nothing in this section may be construed to authorize the Department of State or the Broadcasting Board of Governors to disseminate within the United States any program material prepared for dissemination abroad on or before the effective date of Section 1078 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2013. Welcome to the NDAA 2013. The groundwork is being laid. Flash forward to July 2013. Out of foreign policy, the U.S. repeals propaganda ban, spreads government-made news to Americans. For decades, a so-called anti-propaganda law prevented the U.S. government's mammoth broadcasting arm from delivering programming to American audiences, which of course led into House Resolution 5736, otherwise known as the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012, which legalized propaganda to be broadcast here within these United States, and signed into law by 44. December 2016, out of Zero Hedge, Obama quietly signs the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act into law. Our enemies are using foreign propaganda and disinformation against us and our allies, and so far the U.S. government has been asleep at the wheel. But today, with this bill, now law, we are finally signaling that enough is enough. And within that article, we get to find out about the NDAA of 2017 underneath Senate Bill 2943. In conjunction, we find out about House Resolution 5181, otherwise known as the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act of 2016, also brought up in the Senate under 2692, called the Countering Information Warfare Act of 2016. All brought to us by the combination of the Portman-Murphy. The bill promotes the coordinated strategy to defend America, allies against propaganda and disinformation from Russia and China and others. And just like that, the U.S. Ministry of Truth is officially born. Well, not to be outdone, we gotta get big tech involved, right? Flash forward into September 2017. Why is Google hiring thousands of journalists to flood newsrooms around America? Well, I think we know the answer to that. It's a rhetorical question. And of course, Facebook to invest $300 million to help local news survive. All of that leading into the Communications Decency Act, otherwise known as Section 230 that we all know and love, 47 U.S. Code Section 230, protection for private blocking and screening of offensive material. A lot in the news about that here lately, and whether or not big tech can actually hide behind that, right? Flash forward into September 2019, out of Breitbart, Facebook, in court filings defending itself from a lawsuit filed by activist and congressional candidate Laura Loomer, has cited its First Amendment right as a publisher, contradicting public claims by the company that its a social media service is a platform. Whoops. And of course, not to be outdone, Judicial Watch has this. Most of Facebook's censorship board has ties to left-wing billionaire George Soros. It's time to wake up, America. Our First Amendment is, has, and continues to be under assault. Realize, realize, realize. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Alright, welcome back, everybody. How you guys doing? Did you guys all have a good Christmas out there? Those of you guys just joining here this morning? Hopefully you guys did. Hopefully you got a little bit of rest, got to see some family, friends, disregarded all the BS out of the World Health Organization, Anthony Fauci, all the crap through the media. Just had some time to relax, enjoy friends, family, have a little company, trade some stories. Hopefully didn't talk about politics too much or have to worry about vaccines and social distancing, masking, all that crap. But in the meantime, this has been a little nugget I've kind of been waiting for. The Devolution Part 15 came out last night, and I find the timing rather interesting. There is a line of demarcation or a bit of information that dropped last week that perhaps maybe many of us either overlooked or took for granted. But I just thought the timing was interesting because many of us have had questions as to why Trump has been continually pushing the jab, even though many of us probably think, hey, this probably is not for the good. And obviously it started to upset some folks who have likely followed him and will continue to follow him regardless. Of course, this is going to get into some of that here as well. But it was rather disconcerting, and it led to a question that I had that only really left about two options for Trump at this point. Number one, this was all part of devolution, and we hadn't yet seen how exactly Operation Warp Speed and the vaccine business all folds into this. And of course, Patel Patriot, and that if you followed through all 14 parts to this point, I think he stated early on, he says, I really don't want to get into this because it's such a rabbit hole of stuff. Well, finally he did. And literally, I think it was just Wednesday, if you're with me on the broadcast over on 5x5, I had this very same discussion. I said, it'd be great if Patel Patriot would actually delve into this. And voila, here we are. And I said, the second option is, if this is not folded into the devolution side of things, then the only possible answer we could have is that Trump is in on it. And so I think this, starts to portend and walk through how this actually fits into the overall plan. And of course, let's just get into it. So hopefully you guys are all caught up and have read through or heard analyses net of the first 14 parts to date. But nonetheless, as a special thank you, this article goes to the Kate Awakening over on Telegram, Patrick Gunnels over on Twitch. Says, I've said from day one that I wanted to stay away from discussing the vaccine because it's such a divisive topic and there is still so much we don't know. I'm finally going to discuss this topic in my Devolution series because there was a bombshell dropped in the news recently. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but there is a picture starting to emerge. Now, one thing I will state for certain, Trump's pro-vaccine stance is directly related to devolution and his dismantling of the deep state. And I guess as we read through this, I'll probably pause periodically just because of the fact I've tracked this crap for so stinking long. If you go over to my Gab page right now, you'll see one of my pinned posts is kind of my version 3 COVID file. I, for lack of a better term, affectionately call it that. Actually getting ready to drop a version 4 here, probably within the next day or two. That's going to add even more to that. Maybe I need to get this in the hands of Patel Patriot. I don't know. But nonetheless, we have learned a ton about the inner workings and machinations of this scamdemic, how it was planned, how far back this goes, what it ties to. Even 10 years ago, it was in the works. Everything from patents to the major players, how the funding worked through the various labs, the tyrants in that, the little petty tyrants in that in all the various states and counties and mayors and that. We've watched all that unfold. I mean, it's been very, very sprawling to that degree. Says the pandemic, the failure cascade. How is it possible that the Biden admin has been failing so miserably? No matter the crossroads, they chose the path that hurts the deep state and benefits Donald Trump. Says if you haven't taken the time to read Slag's The Wartime Presidency series, you should do it as it is a worthwhile read. The author has compiled an astonishing list of enemy failures that suggest deliberate sabotage. Consider the following known enemy actions. They successfully stole the 2020 election, their censoring of conservative viewpoints on mainstream and social media platforms, the successful suppression of facts that were damaging to the Dem presidential candidate Joe Biden, aka the Hunter Biden laptop, successful infiltration of MAGA in order to provoke the incident that occurred on January 6, 2021, providing political cover to brand MAGA as a domestic terrorist threat, successful flip of the U.S. Senate and successful hold of the U.S. House of Representatives, handing over the legislative branch of government to people friendly to the enemy's interests, and successful inauguration of resident Joe R. Biden as the 46th resident, that's what I'm going to call him, not president, of the United States, a politician known to be financially and politically compromised to foreign governments. And that's probably just a short list. I'm sure each and every one of us could probably come up with a handful more, but those are some of the 6 major themes in that, right? Says, however, this brings us to a problem. If a puppet government is actually installed in D.C., why does the enemy seem to be on the losing end of events in Washington and abroad? Now, mind you, this list is rather extensive. To recap, they've got a failure to pass restrictive gun control legislation, a failure to pass the Build Back Better plan with pro-communist parts intact, failure to pass the Green New Deal, failure to stack the Supreme Court, failure to stop 2020 election audits, failure to stop the AUKUS deal. For those that don't know, that was the submarine deal between France, the UK, US, and Australia, which ostracized France and was caught off guard. The failure to stop the F-35 sales to Japan, failure to stop U.S. military aid to Taiwan, failure to secure mineral rights to Afghanistan, failure to impeach Donald Trump twice, failure to implement U.S. vaccine passports, failure to implement U.S. vaccine mandates, failure to keep Chinese products flowing into the U.S. smoothly, hurting the Chinese economy. No matter how hard they try, folks, yes, there are still ships sitting over the horizon from California. Out of sight, out of mind does not work. We know that they're still there. We have tracking. So now we're sitting north of 96-ish, something along those lines. Failure to implement a U.S. social credit system. Failure to stop alternative social media platforms. Yes, we're seeing Getter. We're seeing Truth Social. Gab is getting stronger by day. Number of other sites as well. Failure to stop alternative social media platforms. A lot of partnering going on with Rumble and various others. Frank Speech, you name it, that's still going on. Failure to prevent collapse of China's real estate market. Evergrande and a number have started to fail spectacularly, missing bond payments, coupon payments, and the like. We've talked about it here. Failure to demolish the wall Trump built. Matter of fact, Texas is actually going to legislate within their state to continue building. And failure to close Gitmo. Failure to protect their incumbents from losing 2 Republican challengers, save one exception, Newsom in California, and I think we know that that one was stolen as well. Failure to maintain control of the U.S. educational system, and are losing control rapidly. Failure to stop the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Says, make no mistake, this is a broadside against the USS Deep State. Things will be made public in this trial the public was never meant to know. Failure to stop the Durham investigation. Failure to stop courts from issuing preliminary injunctions that stop vaccine mandates. Failure to successfully prosecute Kyle Rittenhouse for murder, who would have effectively removed the Second Amendment right to use deadly force to defend one's life. Failure to expose or circumvent Trump's PEDs or executive orders that he left behind for the Biden admin. Failure to bring an indictment against Trump. Failure to prevent Americans from uniting under a pro-Constitution political banner. Failure, or future failure, to hold the House and Senate. That looks to be on the horizon, as we've seen a number of politicians suggest that they're not running in 2022 midterms. Failure to protect their incumbent district attorneys from challengers. Chase Bowden comes to mind. People are wising up that this whole defund the police crap and the looting that has ensued are not good for the country. Future failure to protect Roe v. Wade from SCOTUS. It's presently there, waiting decisions on where that's going to go. Probably kicked back to the states, and the 10th Amendment is alive and well. Future failure to prevent SCOTUS from expanding the Second Amendment. The case will involve the question of bear, as in the freedom to leave one's house with a weapon in case of confrontation, with no need to prove the odds of such confrontation to the government. And I forget the actual name of the case. I think it's actually brought by I can't remember the group out of New York. They've been to the Supreme Court many a time before, and it looks like this could be the one that probably upsets the apple cart, and perhaps we would actually see constitutional carry throughout all 50 states and get out from under some of this tyrannical BS that we see where we can't have reciprocal carry across various states. So, ladies and gentlemen, look at that list of fail. If this is a puppet government, this is the absolute worst and ineffective one I've seen ever. Think of that. That's a pretty extensive list, right? I'm sure we could probably all think of others to add to that. But of course, the media spin on that is that all is well, right? Of course, you throw up Psaki up there, the master of spin, and her days as a communications director for her own Evergrande company that she formed after 44's tenure, right? Masters of illusion and spin. Says, how is it possible for a regime to successfully steal an election only to fail so completely at implementing their agenda? Says, I certainly didn't coin the term, but it's appropriate to use it now. Trump and his team have installed Judas goats among the enemy. What is a Judas goat, you ask? Well, per Wikipedia, that is a trained goat used in general animal herding. The Judas goat is trained to associate with sheep or cattle, leading them to a specific destination. Now, in stockyards, a Judas goat will lead sheep to slaughter. That's the key takeaway, right? Are we seeing that? Can you pinpoint any perhaps Judas goats throughout the government or any of the things cited there that seem to be leading the sheep straight to slaughter? Says the idea that Trump's Judas goats have infiltrated the enemy helps us to understand some of Trump's actions. Not only do Judas goats guide the enemy into poor decisions, but they can also provide intel to the good guys. Judas goats or no, Trump and his team have been 10 steps ahead of the enemy. They always seem to know what the enemy is going to do next. COVID is a perfect example of this orchestrated foreknowledge. I'm going to prove to you that Trump knew the enemy's pandemic plans in advance. Now, that advanced knowledge made Trump and team able to make appropriate counter moves. Let's see what we can piece together. And of course, folks, before we get into that, we knew a number of things, right? If you think back to prior to Trump taking office at inauguration January 20th, 2017, think of the things that were going on. I've done a show on impeachment, the first go-around, that they were talking about impeachment even before he was even elected back in November of 2016. You had the folks like the, not the Securities and Exchange, but the import-export folks, Secretary or Commerce, what the heck was it? One of the major groups in D.C. were actually predicting that they would potentially need to impeach Trump. That was before he was ever elected in 2016. You had Mad Maxine Waters mouthing impeach 45 before he ever was inaugurated. And then on top of that, perhaps you might remember that the little nut job Fauci said that Trump was going to deal with a pandemic, and that was back in January of 2017. Now, how did they know that stuff? And do you think behind the scenes that they were planning for this all along? Do you think he just kind of brushed that off and says, meh, whatever? I don't think so. So foreshadowing, on January 9th of 2017, while still under the leadership of Obama, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, released their recommended policy guidelines for departmental development of review mechanisms for potential pandemic pathogen care and oversight, the P3CO. Here's a screenshot of what I wrote on this topic in Devolution Part 14. Key takeaways. Dr. Holden was the director of the OSTP when this policy guidance was issued on January 9th, 2017. Mind you, this is before Trump had ever taken office, inauguration. Another highlight there says lifting the moratorium on gain of function research. And of course, as this has panned out, we've certainly seen a lot about gain of function, whether it be Rand Paul grilling Fauci on the Hill, basically opened up a can on him, and of course, exposing everything that has gone on between him and Kachik and everybody else. It says just 2 days later, during a forum on pandemic preparedness at Georgetown University, Anthony Fauci made this statement. Mind you, this was January 11th of 2017. Again, before Trump ever took office on January 20th, 9 days. Fauci, no doubt, Trump will face surprise infectious disease outbreak. How did he know? Of course, they were planning for this for 10 years prior. However, because of Trump, they never thought she would lose. It kind of accelerated their timeline a little bit, didn't it? So there we had that. It says it's obviously the timing between the lifting of the moratorium on gain-of-function research and Fauci's statements that are intriguing to me, but this isn't the only instance of foreshadowing we have seen. Here are just a few of the many examples of our medical experts, quote-unquote, preparing and planning for a pandemic. We had the Harvard Global Health Institute. The theme for the fall 2017 seminar series was Pandemic Preparedness, Improving Science, Technology, and Access. We had CLADEX, was a day-long pandemic tabletop exercise conducted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security on May 15, 2018 in D.C. And then, of course, everybody's familiar with Event 201, which the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hosted Event 201, a high-level pandemic exercise on October 18th, 2019. Are there others? Perhaps, but at least those are probably some of the more rememberable ones, right? It says we have also recently seen some direct evidence of the United States government funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology based on this article from The Intercept, published September 9th, 2021. The article shows that money used to fund the gain-of-function research originated from the Anthony Fauci-led National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. And of course, the highlight there, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is headed by Anthony Fauci. So as much as he likes to go up there and lie before Congress, Rand Paul grilling him, the facts are there. It's in black and white. Trump and team would have known all of these publicly available facts. Couple this information with the likely idea that Trump has Judas goats among the enemy, and I have no doubt they anticipated the release of some sort of virus. So naturally, if Donald Trump and his team anticipated the release of a virus, they would have taken steps of their own to counter it. Let's look at the steps they took. And I guess before I go on there, referencing Cladex and Event 201 and the like, these guys have been predicting this for a long time, right? Gates, how many times did he go to, what the heck is the forum? Not TradeX, the forums and that. Just totally slipped my tongue here. But anyway, many times he had gone on to talk about this over the last 10 years. 10 years, Gates and Company, through Gavi, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a number of other folks in that they've partnered with, have been planning for this, to enrich himself through all these vaccines, period. Now the counter moves, TEDx, that's what I was thinking of, the TEDx talks. He's talked about it a number of times. So the counter moves, the national security strategy. On December 18th of 2017, Donald Trump released his national security strategy. And there we see a quip out of that. It says there is one section of the national security strategy that gives us our first glimpse of Trump addressing the potential threat of a pandemic. Notice how prescient this section is. And of course, this is combating the biothreats and pandemics. It says whether as the result of a deliberate attack, accident, or natural outbreak, by taking lives, generating economic issues or losses, and contributing to a loss of confidence in government institutions. Do you think we're seeing a lot of that play out right now? Of course we are. It's painful. We've lost loved ones. We've seen members of our congregation go down that likely shouldn't have. But folks, we have to remember we're at war here. Physical, mental, psychological, spiritual, all the above. There's going to be attrition. There's no doubt about it. There's not much we can really do other than to try and get the information out, and it's been a very uphill battle. So this screenshot from December 2017 NSS describes the COVID pandemic we have been living through almost perfectly, demonstrated the impact of biological threats on national security by taking lives, generating economic losses, and contributing to a loss in confidence in government institutions. Congress, the government as a whole, the bureaucracy, the unelected officials, who trust them at this point? I don't know too many people that do. And I suspect even the poll numbers that indicate that they're in the single digits are probably too high yet. Probably in the negatives. The Intercept is a an outlet, news outlet that was partly co-founded by Glenn Greenwald, for those asking out in chat there. It's as if Trump knew then that the pandemic would be used to steal an election and contribute to the loss in confidence in our government. A national biodefense strategy on September 18th of 2018, Trump issued the National Security Presidential Memorandum 14, NSPM 14, support for the national biodefense. And there we see that, the subject in its entirety, Section 1, talking about the policy, etc. Says there are two things from NSPM 14 that stand out to me. Please keep these in mind as we move forward. Number 1, the role given to the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, also known as the United States National Security Advisor. This is important because a National Security Advisor is who Donald Trump named as the National Continuity Coordinator, or his or her designee, as well as the chair of the Federal Mission Resilience Committee when he issued Executive Order 13961, Governance and Integration of Federal Mission Resilience, on December 7, 2020. Executive Order 13961 is the proof of devolution that I break down in Part 13. Let's look at the role of the National Security Advisor has for biodefense as laid out by NSPM 14. And here we see that the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, the APNSA, APNSA. The second thing to note is that the NSPM 14 established a Biodefense Steering Committee. The responsibilities of this committee and its chairman are important to remember. Some highlights: shall be chaired by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, HHS, right, Secretary. The committee shall be responsible for monitoring and coordinating the implementation of the strategy, and this secretary, as the chair of the committee, shall serve as the federal lead in coordinating implementation of the strategy. So, the Biodefense Steering Committee will be chaired by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We'll see the Secretary of HHS come up again later, so just keep it in mind. The committee is responsible for monitoring and coordinating the implementation of the strategy. The strategy being referred to as the National Biodefense Strategy, which was issued in conjunction with NSPM 14. Here are a few key screenshots from the National Biodefense Strategy. Deliberate and accidental biological threats walks into that. Science and technology will continue to advance globally, highlighting they also have the potential to facilitate intentional misuse. Right? So with all this technet that we see, what is the one thing that most of us probably fear most? Most of this stuff, obviously, we think is to the good. However, we know that there are bad actors out there who will likely use this in a more nefarious method, right? Support the community of operations. Says community of operations plans, national essential functions. And then also highlighting 4.2.5 here says preserve the continuity of operations, maintain comprehensive and effective continuity of operations, including appropriate devolution to ensure the preservation of the United States government structure under the U.S. Constitution and the continuing performance of national essential functions under all conditions. So the National Biodefense Strategy discussed the following: deliberate biological threats, pathogens stored in laboratories that lack appropriate security, in effect preventing leaks, maybe, intentional misuse of advances in science and technology, and the support and preservation of continuity of operations, including appropriate devolution. It says before we move on, let's do a quick summary of what we've put together so far. 2 days after the moratorium on gain-of-function research was lifted, Fauci made the statement that no doubt Trump will face surprise infectious disease outbreak. There are multiple examples of NGOs and the political establishment holding pandemic exercises. The U.S. government was funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology through grant money originating from the Anthony Fauci-led NIAID. Trump's December 2017 national security strategy specifically mentions pandemics that take lives, generate economic losses, and contribute to the loss of confidence in government institutions. Trump's September 2018 NSPM 14 was specifically geared toward supporting national biodefense and was issued in conjunction with the National Biodefense Strategy. The National Biodefense Strategy discusses deliberate biological threats and outlines support and preservation of continuity of operations. NSPM 14 established a committee chaired by the Secretary of Health and Human Services that was tasked with implementing the National Biodefense Strategy. And SPM 14 established the National Security Advisor as the lead for policy coordination and review to provide strategic input and facilitate policy integration for federal biodefense efforts. After all that, now this is where things get really interesting. Modernizing influenza vaccines. Influenza, do we still have that? Influenza A and B? Where did those go after the inception, as it were, of COVID here over the last 2 years now? Do your local health departments even still track that stuff by chance? So since the beginning of his presidency, Trump and our military have viewed China as the biggest threat to not just America, but democracy everywhere. This fact has been mentioned by Trump numerous times, but also laid out in the previously mentioned national security strategy. Democracy everywhere. What have we heard over the last couple of weeks, folks? The fact that perhaps Trump will throw his hat in the ring again in 2024, and what have we heard the left come out and say, including HRC? Our democracy will cease to exist, right? Interesting timing of all this. So here's a few quips out of the National Security Strategy. It says, remember what we have already discussed. There were hints of a pandemic that might arise during Trump's administration. NGOs and universities with sketchy ties to the deep state were running pandemic exercises. There are interesting ties between Wuhan and our own Anthony Fauci, among others. Trump was already taking steps to beef up our biodefense in the face of a pandemic and deliberate biological threats. He also likely has Judas goats among the enemy, which could provide intel. Knowing all of that and knowing how Trump viewed China based on his national security strategy, I can guarantee you that a large focus of our military surveillance and intelligence was on Wuhan in China. I believe some of the actions he took can, around the time that COVID began, nearly prove that. And I guess one thing that perhaps Patel Patriot did not throw in here, and I've already read through this last night, mind you, is what is another perhaps indicator that we saw play out here over the course of the last week. Did we not just see, what was it, a Harvard professor and that go down for taking money from China? And not only was he indicted, but was on trial and found guilty. And of course, probably took millions in bank accounts before, they had the goods on him at the end of the day. The jury only had to deliberate for about 2.5 hours, came back with a verdict, and found him guilty. And mind you, this is not just one institution, but there are many where that has taken place. They got caught with their hand in a cookie jar. Infiltration, not invasion, should come to mind, right? It says, before I show you those actions, there is one more interesting thing we need to look at. As I have already stated, we don't yet have all the facts surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, but there are some interesting details we can look at as we're piecing things together. In August of 2021, the House Foreign Affairs Republicans issued a report that provides us with some important information on the origins of COVID-19. And of course, I think the Occam's razor, as it were, would be to try and paint the case that, was it Fort Detrick? Was it Wuhan? Who is it? There's this constant back and forth, right? Trying to paint us inside a box and say, all right, these are your options you have, but think outside that box. What really happened here? So out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, sometime before September 12th, 2019, also highlighting the sudden removal of the WIV's virus and sample database in the middle of the night on September 12, 2019, and without explanation. Athletes at the Military World Games held in Wuhan in October 2019 who became sick with symptoms similar to COVID-19 both while in Wuhan and also shortly after returning to their home countries. And then, of course, highlighting the fact they have satellite imagery of Wuhan in September and October 2019. Showed an uptick in the number of people at local hospitals surrounding the WIV's headquarters. Remember that from the early days? You know, they were trying to feed us propaganda. People were dropping over like flies over there. But I think this was pretty well understood, depending on the news outlet net that you track, that this was going on. Now, the report concludes that COVID originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology and also gives us some dates we can look at. COVID originated from Wuhan sometime before September 12, 2019. The WIV's virus and sample database was removed in the middle of the night on September 12, 2019. The World Military Games took place from the 18th to the 27th of October 2019 in Wuhan, China, and was the first super spreader of COVID. And the United States has satellite imagery of Wuhan. Now is when we need to recall what I told you about the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, also known as the National Security Advisor. Not only was the position of National Security Advisor given a lead role for federal biodefense efforts, but it was also given one of the most important roles in the implementation and execution of devolution laid out by Executive Order 13961. I can't stress enough how important it is for you to read Devolution Part 13 to understand the importance of Executive Order 13961. On September 10th, 2019, Trump fired Bolton as a national security advisor. And of course, we saw how effective he was, right? And instead, on September 18th, Robert O'Brien took office as a national security advisor. It says the very next day, on September 19th, 2019, Trump issued Executive Order 13887, modernizing influenza vaccines in the United States to promote national security and public health. And there we see said executive order with the title just described. And of course, Section 2 is talking about national security priority and also highlights to advance the developments of new broadly protective vaccine candidates that provide more effective and longer lasting immunities. Immunities. Vaccine and immunities. Wait a minute. Haven't we seen how they've moved the goalposts and changed definitions now? Didn't they change the name of vaccine to not be immune? Interesting. Section 3, National Influenza Vaccine Task Force, which was co-chaired by the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Health and Human Services or their designees. So now the DoD is in bed with HHS and vice versa. Section 3 of EO 13887 established the National Influenza Vaccine Task Force, which is co-chaired by the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So remember, I told you to keep the position of Secretary of Health and Human Services in mind. The task force was created to, quote, achieve the objectives identified in Section 2 of EO 13887. Let's look at a few more interesting details within the executive order. It says the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And here it lays out what the report shall include. The task force created by EO 13887 and co-chaired by the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of Health and Human Services was to submit a report to the President through some very key positions. Let's look closer at those positions, as each one has a role in the devolution that we have previously discussed. There is only one of these that needs some further explanation. The rest you should have sufficient background of their significance if you have read Devolution Part 13. So it says Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, also known as the National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. Keep in mind that NSPM 14 established a National Security Advisor as the lead for policy coordination and review to provide strategic input and facilitate policy integration for federal biodefense efforts. Aside from that, we got the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy, Joe Grogan and Brooke Rollins. Joe started in this position at the time EO 13887 was issued. However, he resigned in May of 2020 and was replaced by Brooke Rollins. After Trump's first term ended, Brooke went on to form a key organization I discussed in Devolution Part 13. Now, what did she do? Well, she focused on continuing to promote Trump's public policies, the America First Policy Institute. which was launched in April 2021 as a 501c3 org, Rollins serving as president and CEO. So that's going on in the background, right? A director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vaught. Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Kevin Drogemeyer. And the final interesting thing within EO 13887 is what it tasked to the Secretary of Defense. And here we see it says transitioning DoD's annual procurement of influenza vaccines to vaccines manufactured both domestically and through faster, more scalable, and innovative technologies. Interesting. And the conduct of epidemiological studies of vaccine effectiveness to improve knowledge of the clinical effect of the currently licensed influenza vaccines. So perhaps as this stuff was rolling out at the onset, if Fauci and company said, hey, he's going to have to deal with a pandemic of some sort, did they figure it was going to be flu-related and stick with that? Or, obviously, as this EO came out during the pandemic, why did they opt to keep it as a flu vax? Identify opportunities to use DoD's vaccine research and development enterprise in collaboration with HHS to include both early discovery and design of influenza vaccines as well as later stage evaluation of candidate influenza vaccines. Investigate in collaboration with HHS alternative correlates of immune protection that could facilitate development of next-gen influenza vaccines, and also highlighting during a pandemic. Interesting. Why focus on the flu vax in a time where COVID is the prevalent thing? So not only did EO 13887 establish a national influenza task force that reported to the president through key people we know to be involved in devolution, but also allowed for the DoD to collaborate with HHS to design and evaluate influenza vaccines. Now this is massively important when we look at some news that just recently came out related to the Army and vaccines. On December 21st, 2021, Defense One published a bombshell of an article. The U.S. Army creates single vaccine against all COVID and SARS variants, researchers say. Within weeks, Walter Reed researchers expect to announce that human trials show success against Omicron and even future strains. Now, I saw this article come out last week. I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. That would, in effect, put an end to the whole scamdemic. And of course, all this cycle and that we find ourselves in, with all these variants in that they whip up out of nowhere. They have no way of proving these things, mind you, because the strain has never been isolated. And all they're using is the media to provide hype. And yet, even though we have watched this quote-unquote Omicron variant come out of South Africa, which again, the descriptor that I like to use is nothing more than a storm in a teacup. That's in their own words. The West and the media out of the UK, Europe, here, have all hyped this up to be way more than what it actually is. And the question is why? I think we know the answer to that. So, some key takeaways out of said article says within weeks, scientists at the Walter Reed Institute of Research expect to announce that they have developed a vaccine that is effective against COVID-19 and all its variants, even Omicron, as well as previous SARS origin viruses that have killed millions of people worldwide. So that would seem to allude that not only SARS-CoV-2, but the predecessor SARS-CoV-1. And of course, if you go back on the channel here, where I've got a lot of this archived, I've got a whole playlist of crap on COVID over the last year. But we've talked about the H1N109 and how this plays into that as well. Some of the things that they leverage from that. Says the achievement is the result of almost 2 years of work on the virus. The Army lab received its first DNA sequencing of the COVID-19 virus in early 2020. So how in the world did the Army receive the sequencing of the virus? Exactly. You know, how many people have sued the CDC to try and get the sequencing of this particular virus to no avail? Why? How did the Army get it but nobody else? Why isn't the CDC providing it to those who sue them for it? Just some questions that, as we walk through this, at least that I had. Anyway, this is going to go on to talk about a few more things here. Highlights, he said nearly all of Walter Reed's 2,500 staff had some role in the vaccine's nearly 2-year development. Had anybody heard of this taking place behind the scenes until now? Pretty tight-lipped. So in early 2020, with Trump as president, the DoD began research on a vaccine that was effective against not just COVID-19, but all previous SARS origin viruses and all future variants. They have been working on this for almost 2 years, and nearly all of Walter Reed's 2,500 staff had some role in development, and this is the first we heard about it. This vaccine would be the death blow to the NWO plans. The fact that this type of research was even happening was because of the door opened to the DoD from Executive Order 13887. We need to look at this from a 40,000-foot view because the implications here are truly stunning. Let's recap our previous summary and add a brief timeline surrounding the release of COVID. Now, mind you, I'll skip through some of the stuff we already read here, talking about the 2-day moratorium. We stated that before. It says the National Biodefense Strategy discusses deliberate biological threats and outlines support and preservation of continuity of operations. NSPM 14, HHS, tasked with implementing the National Biodefense Strategy. We covered all that. It says all the above show circumstantial evidence of a deep state plan to release a pandemic on the world and evidence of Trump taking actions to prepare for such an attack. Now, the timeline surrounding the escape of COVID-19. September 10th, 2019, Bolton is fired as the NSA advisor. September 12th, 2019, on or before, COVID-19 is thought to have quote-unquote escaped the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab based on a report by the House Foreign Affairs Republicans. September 12th, 2019, the Wuhan Institute of Virology's virus and sample database was removed in the middle of the night. September 18th, 2019, Robert O'Brien took office as a National Security Advisor. The National Security Advisor is the lead for policy coordination for national biodefense efforts and would later become a central figure to devolution under Executive Order 13961. Then, on the 19th of September 2019, EO 13887 is issued. It is no coincidence that EO 13887 was issued the very day after O'Brien took office as a National Security Advisor. It is a similar feeling to Christopher Miller being appointed acting Secretary of Defense the day after the Associated Press declared Biden the winner of the 2020 election. All about timing, right? Now, I can't recall at the time whether or not we determined or deciphered whether or not Robert O'Brien was to the good or bad. But nonetheless, says Trump knew a pandemic was coming. He started to prepare the battlefield, and as we can clearly see, EO 13887 plays a major role in that preparation. I believe this is only part of the bigger picture. Now, I've said before that if Trump knew the election was going to be stolen and did nothing about it, then I would consider him complicit in the destruction of America. I'm going to say the same thing here regarding COVID-19. If Trump knew there was going to be a pandemic, which I believe he did, and he didn't take steps to fight it, then I would consider him complicit in the destruction brought about by the scamdemic as well. And that was kind of what led to my discussion here in the last week or so of coming up with two possible things, right? Either Trump knew about this stuff, folded it into the whole devolution plan, or he was in on it, based on what we've seen through a lot of these rallies and continuing to promote the vax. And I think this is going to walk through that scenario here a little bit more here in just a second. But A reasoned mind could only come to those 2 points, I think. It says, I believe EO 13887 and the military vaccine that stemmed from it goes hand in hand with something Trump has been consistently touting as one of his greatest achievements, Operation Warp Speed. And of course, many of us have wondered just what exactly is Operation Warp Speed. Was its intent to get the delivery of the Pfizer, the Moderna, Johnson & Johnson jabs net out to hotspots all around the country, utilize the military's logistics, things of that nature? Or was there something more to this? So Operation Warp Speed, I believe EO 13887 and OWS are the 2 primary steps Trump took to fight COVID-19 and the plan of control brought about by the deep state. I think we need to look at OWS a little closer for some content. Here are some screenshots from the Operation Warp Speed plans. And a quip from that says Operation Warp Speed, a partnership between the DoD and Department of Health and Human Services. So again, showing the linkage between the DoD and HHS. It says the DoD and HHS have obligated approximately $13 billion as of December 31st, 2020 to support the development, manufacture, and distribution of vaccines to help achieve this goal. Does it state anywhere in there that it says, hey, we're partnering up with Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, any of these typical manufacturers to get that stuff out there? Or does it leave that pretty broad-based? All the while, the research is going on behind the scenes, and then boom, here on the 21st of December, just a few days ago, we find out what has been under very tight wraps, the fact that they've been doing this behind the scenes. Continuing on, says HHS, with the support of the DoD, established a time frame for documenting and sharing a national plan for distributing and administering COVID-19 vaccine. And I'll read the rest of that because that's, I think he should have highlighted, but it says, among other things, outline an approach for how efforts would be coordinated across federal agencies and non-federal entities. To date, this recommendation has not been fully implemented. GAO reiterates the importance of doing so. Effective coordination and communication among federal agencies, commercial partners, jurisdictions, and providers is critical to successfully deploying COVID-19 vaccines and managing public expectations, especially because the initial supply of vaccines has been limited. Now, no word on whether or not this is fairly recent or if this was at the time, but think of that, the distribution of what we have currently out there. Operation Warp Speed established a partnership between the DoD and HHS to support the development, manufacture, and distribution of vaccines. Remember why the DoD and HHS are so important. Secretary of HHS is the chair of the Biodefense Steering Committee tasked with implementing the National Biodefense Strategy that was established by NSPM 14. The Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of HHS co-chaired the National Influenza Vaccine Task Force. EO 13887 allowed the Secretary of Defense to implement vaccine development within the DoD. So, within the framework of OWS, the DoD and HHS are assisting Big Pharma in fast-tracking their vaccine development, manufacturing, and distribution. Now we know Big Pharma is part of the deep state and would love to keep us in a perpetual state of vaccines and variants, right? How is it that Pfizer and company seem to know, after November 26, when all of this started to blow up with the Omicron, they had to rename and skip G for obvious reasons, that they would be in the know and be able to whip up whether or not a new vaccine would indeed cover said variant. Or was there never a variant to begin with? I don't know. It says if Trump hadn't issued EO 13887 and then implemented Operation Warp Speed, it could have taken years upon years before we ever saw a vaccine. And that perpetual nightmare of variants and vaccines would have become a reality. Just how long would they have kept us locked down? Instead, EO 13887 paved the way for fast-tracked vaccines, and the DoD and HHS helped get these big pharma vaccines to the public as soon as possible. This heroically sabotaged the deep state's original plan. Their entire timeline was overhauled and replaced with Trump's timeline. And I think that's the argument that many of us probably have had in the back of our minds, that we kind of forced their hand, right? At the end of the day, what would have happened if nothing would have been available? So Trump kind of had to thread the needle, as it were, as to how best to play this out. Force their hand, move up their schedule, adopt his timeline, already has the EOs in place. Otherwise, would we be in a situation like what Australia is in right now? How many lockdowns have they gone through? This zero COVID policy of, hey, if even one case pops up, well, that's too bad. 13 million people get shut down. Or even what Jacinda Ardern has had take place in New Zealand, only to finally say, you know what, this isn't working and we're going to scrap the whole COVID zero business, right? Says, now this is where some minor speculation comes into play, but I'm only speculating based on the evidence I have put forth. I believe Operation Warp Speed to be twofold. Number one, Trump not only moved the timeline of their plan up by many years, but he allowed them to get their first vaccine distributed as soon as possible. That necessitated the acceleration of their Phase 2 variant, which brought about the need for new vaccines and boosters. This accelerated rollout made their plan obvious to the whole world. Endless variants and endless vaccines, and the ostracization of anybody who didn't comply. It exposes Fauci, Big Pharma, the Biden admin, media, etc. Is that not exactly what we have seen play out? You know, as COVID rolled out, scare, 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 2 weeks to flatten the curve, mask up, social distance, all this crap, no studies to back it, any of that stuff, whip up the fear, amp it up to 11. Oh, now we got the vaccine. All right, time to go get the jab. Great. Double dose, depending on which manufacturer you go with. Right? And then all of a sudden, oh, hang on. Big Pharma didn't quite make enough money on that first go around, so let's break out the Delta. All right, media, go. Whip up Delta. Fearmonger. Now you got to get a booster. Oh, you're not fully jabbed now until you get 2. Now 3. Israel leads the way. Now, whip up another one, Omicron. Never letting a crisis go to waste. We do have a midterm coming up here, so well, I think we can probably use this to our advantage here. Whip up Omicron. Oh, hang on. We need to change the definition of what it means to be fully vaxxed. Oh, by the way, this is a war against the unvaxxed because they are the ones who are spreading it. In the meantime, we see all sorts of cruise ships fully vaxxed up having outbreaks. And even some military ships here as of late, right? Interesting. But it's the war on the unvaxxed. They're the super spreaders, right? Now, number 2, the second part is the behind-the-scenes production of an effective single vaccine that works against all future variants. This catch-all vaccine destroys their plan in one blow. While they are gearing up for a dark winter and more lockdowns, we get news of a vaccine that ends the current virus and all future viruses they could throw at us. Think of that. Omicron. What is the symbol in Greek for Omicron? Does that not look like the Om symbol? Started with Alpha. Alpha and Omega. Who is the beginning and the end, biblically? Perhaps a little divine intervention here. Says the point here is that while the DoD and HHS were helping to rush the ineffective Big Pharma vaccines to market, they were working on their own vaccine in secret. There were 0 leaks, and that tells me it was a white hat operation. Part of the mandate for the DoD and HHS under Operation Warp Speed was to assist in the development of the Big Pharma vaccines, but clearly, Big Pharma wasn't in the loop about this new military vaccine that could end the pandemic outright. Ruh-roh. So people wonder, how in the heck do we get out of this vicious loop that we're in, right? Got to whip up fear, drop a little variant out there, push the fear up to 11 through the media, go get the jab, threaten, use the employees, threaten the employees a little more. People bow. You maybe pick up a couple, 2-3% of folks in that who will go get the jab who otherwise wouldn't have, right? And then people say, okay, well, now that that's done, we can return to normal. They give you some of your rights back. You can go back to restaurants and various venues, things of that nature. They uh, relieve some of the mandates, things of that nature. Things get a little too cozy for them, and now we need to whip it up again. So the cycle repeats. However, what the DoD and HHS developed would put a stop to that right quick. Everything we covered further solidifies that devolution is in play. Many of the same players we know to be involved with devolution based on what we discuss in Devolution Part 13 also play significant roles in Trump's pandemic counter moves. The Operation Trump set in motion surrounding the pandemic and the devolution operation discussed in the Devolution series are one in the same. So in closing, I posted a few polls on my Telegram channel, and we are able to come to some logical conclusions based on the data gathered. And for those of you guys who might be over on Telegram, maybe you guys either contributed or saw these various pollings here. It says, if the election were held tomorrow and Trump and Biden were both running, who would you vote for? 96% said Trump, 0% said Biden, 4% said third-party candidate out of almost 20,000 votes cast. Another one says, has Trump's pro-vaccine stance led you to get the vaccine? 1% said yes, 99% said no out of more than 27,000 votes cast. Has Trump's pro-vaccine stance changed the fact that you would vote for him? 92% said they would still vote for Trump. 8% Trump no longer has my vote out of over 24,000 votes cast. So do you think the folks on Team MAGA are seeing through this? So it begs the question, why is Trump still pushing it? Well, when I look at the above results, it tells me that Trump's pro-vax stance isn't geared towards his base. A majority of his supporters will still vote for him regardless, and those same supporters still won't get the jab even though Trump supports it. Trump knows all of this. Trump has taught his base to question what the mainstream media and government officials tell us. Trump has taught us to do our own research and use our freedom of choice to make the decision we feel is best. So if his pro-vax stance isn't geared towards his supporters, we can logically determine it's for those who don't support him. Right? Now, Cliff High has presented what I would consider to be the best explanation of Trump's pro-vax stance. This brief 15-minute video outlines it. I'll come back to that. So it's a great theory that fits the facts available to us. When Trump talks about the vaccines, we simply can't take him at face value. And I think that's kind of the summation line of the total 15 minutes. I had seen that here recently. But I'll drop the link out there, not only for the Devolution Part 15, but this as well. Matter of fact, I'll just do that now. Here's the actual video. I might play that, but being I'm still on YouTube at the moment, I'll probably have to kill the YouTube side and allow that to play on the alt platforms here. But should you not decide to join from the YouTube side here as I let this play, come over to DLive, Twitch, all the rest of them here. You can watch it here in just a minute. So when Trump talks about the vaccines, we simply can't take him at face value. EO 13887 and OWS dramatically accelerated all timelines, causing the deep state to panic and go all in on increasingly unhinged mandates, variants, and vaccines. Don't forget what Trump's ultimate goal here is. He's trying to unite America against those who seek to control and destroy us. He is engineering a mass awakening and has to do so while carefully navigating the COVID and vaccine situation. How do you reach over half the population who have been savagely indoctrinated by the leftist universities and mainstream media. They believe the vaccines are literally the only solution to ending the scamdemic. How would the media react to Trump coming out against the vaccine? And I think he's absolutely right there, because look at what has happened. We've talked about this many a times, the ever-moving goalposts. Would the people on the left, those who are maybe a little bit more centrist Dems, and that recognize that, hey, you told me I had to take 2 jabs and I didn't have to mask. What are they showing? Oh, now you have to mask regardless. No, you still have to social distance. No, you still have to hop on a plane with a mask, even though you are quote-unquote fully vaccinated. Oh, wait a minute. What does it mean to be fully vaccinated? Colorado has come out and says, oh, well, you have to have at least a minimum of 3 now, right? And now it's about to go to 4 because Omicron's out. And of course, they've got to whip up another concoction. Israel, same thing. Oh, what happens if you're not fully jabbed? Well, within 90 days, guess what? Your COVID pass expires. If people are watching this play out, you can't not see this play out. And so here we are. It says we can speculate all day long as to why Trump is doing what he is doing, but we won't have the answers until the dust settles. If you're looking for why he has been so consistent in his pro-vax stance, you won't find the answer here. But this is what I can tell you. Trump knew a pandemic was coming, and he took steps to prepare for it. What his military vaccine news demonstrates to us is that we still don't have the full picture of what is truly going on behind the scenes in the war against the deep state. You know who does have the full picture? President Donald John Trump. Let's not lose faith in him now. I don't mention this very often, but prior to starting the Devolution series, I was posting my content on a small social media platform. I'd like to show you how I ended one of my first ever threads from February 11th of this year, because my feelings haven't changed in the slightest. Trump loves this country and has gone through hell fighting to save it. He's made and kept promise after promise to us. My vote is one of the least significant things Trump has earned from me. He's earned my admiration, my respect, and most of all, my trust. None of that probably means much to him, but it means a lot to me, and there are a lot of me's out there. He said the best is yet to come, and we believe him. He's given us no reason to doubt him. And that's how he ends it here today. The best is yet to come. So I think what I will do, if you've got 15 minutes more, we'll allow this to play through, because I did find this part rather fascinating. And for you guys on YouTube, if you would, jump over. I'll let this play through here out of Red Pill News on the 23rd. If you've seen it, great. Drop the link out there if you wish to watch it on your own. But we'll let this play through here and give it a go.